Hi, my name is Alex Espaillat. I currently serve as an Assistant Director in the Center for Multicultural Affairs here at Duke University. With me today I have Mr. Julian Sanchez, former Director of the Office of Intercultural Affairs, the name that predated our current Center for Multicultural Affairs. Hi Julian, it is so wonderful to have you here.
It's my pleasure. It's really happy to be here.
Well, I want to start by asking, how did you come into relationship with our center?
Well, I was hired to direct the Office of Intercultural Affairs in 1993, so I was here for the academic year 93-94. And at that time, we were located in the West Union building in a very tight, small space. There were two offices and separated by a very small reception area. And that was, the location was fine because it was on West Campus in the quad area. But the size was, it shocked me when I got there that we would be servicing roughly 24% of the student body, and with no real space to meet and do anything with. And then we were also assigned a $4,000 budget for programming, which was nothing. So I had to figure out how I would eventually be able to gain more space, gain more staff, because we were a staff of two, and periodically we'd hire a student to man the reception desk. So it took a long time to get to the Multicultural Center. What was helpful was that there was a student organization called Spectrum, and they were founded in 1998, and they were a very progressive intercultural group. And I met them when they did their silent protest at Nan Cohen's inaugural speech, right in front of the chapel. They were very polite, they had signs, and their campaign was, "We want a real education." And what they meant is they wanted more diversity in the curriculum, and they wanted a more diverse faculty. And so I figured, well, this is a group that we would work with. And we did. So we hooked up with them, and then there was a group, or I think we created a group called the Group of Cultural Presidents. So with those two, we would create an agenda to move towards, a multicultural space. And Spectrum was very, very vocal and articulate in how and why they wanted this space. So very little movement was taking place at that time, but it was a start. At the same time, there was a Black Studies was in place, but it was not yet a department. Native American, Latino Studies, and Asian American Studies were not even in the frame. So I had to take all of this in and figure out, what direction we would move in and how we would move in that direction. Mary Lou Williams Center was well established. However, they were in the basement of the West Union building. And Spectrum was also advocating for an expansion of the Mary Lou Williams Center at the same time that they wanted a multicultural center. So also in place was Vice President for Student Affairs, Janet Smith Dickerson, and then Nan Cohen was our new president. And that was the bright side of the whole thing, because they were very staunch supporters of diversity and would help us along the way and would support our efforts. We decided to also, and I guess, I'm trying to think, it took us about 12 years to the grand opening of the Multicultural Center. But prior to that, we had a Ford Foundation grant, a Hewlett, Flora Hewlett grant, and a Philip Morris grant. Those grants allowed us to grow the cultural fund and programming fund, and to grow staff. Excuse me, with the William and Flora Hewlett grant, we were able to hire a graduate student to help us coordinate our efforts. And each grant had a programming component to it, with diversity and intercultural programming. So the idea there was that the institution would then honor those grants by coming up with base funding once the grants were over with. So as a result of that, we ended up with a university grant, which was the President's University Grant. And President Cohane created that fund. It was $100,000. So that went a long way to helping us with our programming efforts. That grant was for all students that were recognized by DSG to do intercultural and diversity programming. The cultural fund would come later, not too much later, but it also was another $100,000 grant. So by 2008, we had $208,000 in program funding. And what we did was we created a structure where students would have to apply for these grants, student groups. So the idea there was that we would train them to write proposals, to present the proposals, and then to also focus on diversity and intercultural communications and relations, and to build unity across groups. So those funds allowed us to do an awful lot. By 2000, we had come up with, or I had come up with the idea of having a forum where student groups could deliver State of the University reports from their perspectives. And we call this the Unity Through Diversity Luncheon, which is a forum that would become an annual forum. Following the first forum, President Cohane named 5 Blue Ribbon committees that were chaired by senior administrators and faculty dean. The focus of those were cultural funding, mentoring, alumni, student mentoring, cultural space, minority student life. I forget which the 5th one was, but there were 5 committees. And from those 5 committees, the curriculum also, from those 5 committees, we gained just great ground in terms of creating the cultural fund and moving towards the multicultural space. Because Spectrum presented a wonderful report on the need for the multicultural space. And President Cohane honored that desire. So from 2000 to 2002, we came to the place where the Multicultural Center would be created. And in 2002, we had a grand opening, and there was this space here, which was just wonderful considering where we came from the very tiny space. So once we got here, we were able to then hire a program coordinator and a full-time receptionist who could also help me be the budget manager. And then we had a programming space that was just This is great. So students could present programs out of this space. We could do, intercultural programs out of this space. And, from there, it was just wonderful.
It's amazing. Well, you've framed a lot of the time and space throughout your entire tenure, and I'm sure there's many, many more details that I'd love to get to. But I think I want to ask, what was the climate like, both when you began your role and sort of the tone of the students that you all were trying to serve throughout your time here?
The climate was, the university did not have an articulated plan or design for diversity, so that was not in place. And so the students had to advocate for, diversity programs and diversity space. The climate among the students, periodically there'd be tension between student groups, mainly the cultural groups and the fraternity groups. So there were difficult dialogues that had to be held. And it was a good time to begin to launch into diversity programming and to begin the conversations, difficult conversations that need to be had. Faculty, we needed more diversity in the faculty. So it was just, it's just a time that to launch the programs. There wasn't a lot of real heavy tension in the climate, but it was there, enough that it had to be addressed. It was mainly representation and inclusion and feeling like the place belonged to them, or they were part of the space of the university, that they were just not part of the furniture, the student groups, that's student cultural student. But that's in regards to climate. I can't think of anything else that I can speak of in terms of that.
Sure. So from your perspective, I understand, and I'm going to test myself on the timeline. We went from Office of Black Affairs to Office of Minority Affairs to Office of Intercultural Affairs. And I understand sort of how the name switched, but there is almost like a rebirth around the time that you got here, and really welcoming in and including the students that were deemed marginalized here. So still always having relationship with Black students, but now we're talking about Latino students, and we're elevating, Asian American, Pacific Islander students, and so on and so forth. What was that like for you, sort of being at the helm of really changing the tone of how we service marginalized and intercultural students?
It was a good and interesting challenge. It was not new to me. It was something that I had done before. And I really welcomed the challenge. When I came here, I was looking for a new challenge, and Duke presented it. So it was the start of something new. Figuring out how to strategize to be able to do this was the important piece. And identifying the stakeholders that I would work with was critical. Stakeholders from the faculty to the students. I formed for the Latino community, I formed what's called the Concilio Latino Hispanoamericano. Formed that with John Herrera, who was in international studies, and Rebecca Palacios, who was in admissions. So the three of us founded this new group. And what we wanted to do is really develop a Latino intellectual and cultural agenda for the campus. So we had a great response in our first meeting. We had something in the area, about 60 faculty that attended, And from there, we broke up into working groups to do outreach in the community, to work on the curriculum, and to work on cultural events. And the main goal was to push for a Latino studies program. So that was the start of that. And that was in 1997. In the year 2000, when we did the first Unity Through Diversity Forum, El Concilio presented a full report on the needs of Latinos at Duke, and that led to the creation of Latino Studies. So as a matter of fact, if you look at Latino Studies website, you'll see where they mention this as a precursor to Latino Studies. So working with the different groups, I mean, I was at the University of La Crosse, Wisconsin, where the main group there was our Indigenous, our Native American students. And shortly after I got to La Crosse, there was an influx of Hmong students. So I did a lot of work with them, and there was a small Asian community. And the African American community was small. But I also worked at UC Santa Barbara, where I was in the Center for Chicano Studies, and there we were a center that was completely, I mean, everything that we needed was in the center. The faculty, the students, the organizations, the student organizations. So my background was such that it was very easy for me to flow between groups. Plus, I mean, I grew up in a multicultural environment, so I was always used to being around. My friends were all intercultural, so it was very easy for me to manage that aspect of it. So it was just then important to try to identify the needs of each of these groups. And so that's where the Council of Culture Group Presidents was important. Excuse me, because then they could articulate their needs, and we could work together on an agenda to meet those needs. And so that's sort of how I approached the whole challenge. Of course, as I mentioned before, the funding was critical, so that's where the grants were important. Plus the Ford grant, you should take a good look at that, because that was an assessment portfolio. It was an assessment of the campus climate in 1997. And there's a nice timeline there of diversity at Duke that starts in 1880 up to 1997, which is a very nice timeline. But the information that was gathered through the assessment was important in helping us sort of shape our agenda and to understand some things that were happening on the campus. I mean, there were some curious things to me. The Latino student enrollment was 3% at the time. African American enrollment was 8.8% in 1993. Asian student enrollment was at 12%. And Native enrollment was at 0.12%. So by 1980, by 2008, we had doubled the Latino enrollment, and the Asian student enrollment had doubled as well. So it went from 12 to 21% or something like that. Latino students went from 3% to almost 7%. And in 2008, we had 27 Native students. So that brought the percentage up to 0.43%. So we were gaining in enrollments, but it was always curious to me why the African American enrollment never, to this day, has not increased beyond 10%. I mean, I think it was 8.8% in '93, and then it was 9, and then it became 9.9%. And I think currently it's probably about the same. So currently, I think the campus is at 46% students of color, which is a good number. But in terms of, I mean, you always have to disaggregate the data. I mean, the university can present it in aggregated data and say, okay, we're 46% diverse, but when you break it down to the individual parts, that tells a more clear story. So we were careful to do that. We did that with graduate students as well as undergraduate students, so we could clearly understand where we need to put our focus.
Create accessible knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. And then the idea with the university through Diversity Forum was to create institutional memory to pass on to cultural groups that would come later, and to staff like yourself that would come later, so that they would understand where we started and how we got to where we were, and to see if you're moving forward or backwards at this point. I can't tell where you're going now.
Well, that actually really tees me up for the next question, which is, with your breadth and depth of experience, not just at Duke, because 93 to 2010 is a solid amount of time to really get a good feel as for trends and needs, but why are multicultural centers so important?
Well, I think they're critical in terms of showing that the university values the presence of cultural groups, values the presence of diversity, and it's also important to have a space where you could have difficult dialogues on race, diversity, and all the other issues that are difficult dialogues to have. And it's a space where all students can be welcome, where you can develop unity across cultures. You can't do it with individual spaces. I mean, they have to come together at some point. And that's where intercultural and multicultural is important. And it's important to be able to emphasize the need to be united across all groups. And a multicultural center is able to do that with adequate space, but you have to have the right space for it. And this space will define your success or work against. If you don't have the space, it's hard to succeed in your goals to be a multicultural center. So the configuration of space, size of space, and then staffing, diverse staffing is important. I think, especially in these days where there's a big challenge to try to sort of force everyone into a melting pot that doesn't exist, that never has existed, and won't exist. And it's a place where you can appreciate the importance of difference. The most important part of me is my cultural identity. And that's the same for all cultural groups. And it's reinforced in a multicultural center. So I think that's where a multicultural center space is critical.
My mom used to compare it to a stew. I'm Puerto Rican and Dominican. My mom's the Puerto Rican one. She used to compare it to like carne guisada, where you can see, if you look really closely, you can see the seasonings, you can see what you added to what was originally water. You can see, the carne, you can see potatoes, depending on what people put in it. But the point is it all works harmoniously.
Exactly.
And you get to see each individual component, but appreciate where they come together to make something unique. And I took that with me once I got into formal DEI work, and it's what I can't help but use that imagery as I'm listening to you, because it further affirms what I've grown to appreciate, and where I couldn't necessarily find my direct community, how I still kept myself aware and grounded in who I knew I was, but also could appreciate other people.
No, it's an important, a good metaphor to have. And it's beautiful when you think about it.
So, what lessons have you learned, both during your time and also all this time later?
I think it's important to understand the political and territorial nature of the campus. I mean, you have to understand that in order to do the work, because you're going to meet a lot of challenges, and you have to be prepared for that, especially the territorial part. And also, I think it's smart to advise students to identify faculty as advisors. And I would emphasize tenured faculty. And from there, you could have a group of faculty advisors for the center as well. And the reason I say faculty advisors is because students and faculty they enjoy a freedom that middle management does not enjoy, or staff do not enjoy, due to organizational structure. So I think faculty and students can work on agendas, drive agendas, and I would advise students to seize the ground, to take control of the agenda and to drive it, because they have that freedom to do it. And they have to understand the power that they hold. And if they include faculty, especially tenured faculty, to work with them, they can do a lot. So I think those are two important points that I would stress. Then documenting everything that you do, creating a historical record to pass on, an institutional memory to pass on to next generations. It's important, because otherwise students are just reinventing the wheel, and they don't know what's come before them. And they need to understand, I think, that they can build off of what's already been gained, or they can lose it.
And know your history.
Yeah, or they can lose it. And it's easy to lose it when administrations change and you don't have an institutional memory to work from. So I would encourage the center and student groups. I mean, I always encourage the student groups to keep files on their activities so that they could pass on to the next group of students, so that they wouldn't just repeat everything, and they can build on the gains of those who came before them. Those are really important points. And then I think assess your strengths and weaknesses. Strength in space, financial, whether you have the finances to meet the goals that you want to meet, and whether you have the partners that you need to help you move in the direction that you want to move in. I mean, that's what I think of when I think about if I were to have to do this over again, that's where I would put my focus. You have to be prepared to meet roadblocks and not be disappointed, and figure out how you're going to get from point A to point B in however path you can find to make it there. It's sort of like a stream, you know, it just sort of finds its way. You might start off as a young spring meandering around, but at some point maybe begin to straighten out once you're able to gain some of the goals that you set out to gain.
Well, as we start to wrap up, I do want to know, do you have a favorite memory or a really high point of pride during your roughly 17 years here?
Yeah, one thing we didn't mention was the Center for Race Relations. I mean, they did tremendous work on the campus very early on. I mean, and I was really proud of that group and just so happy to work with them. As a matter of fact, we gave them a space within the center from which they could work. That was an incredibly powerful student group that crossed all groups. So I was proud of being engaged with them. I'm proud of the gains we made in the area of the climate for Latinos on the campus, the creation of Latino studies, the creation of the Multicultural Center, clearly. The ability to build a $4,000 programming fund to a $208,000 programming fund. I was proud of that. That allowed students to do just a lot. But before that, students were having to go from pillar to post to get money to put on events. And they were putting on the student organizations were putting on all the diversity events that were happening on the campus in the intercultural events. And they didn't have the funding to do it until we were able to gain the funds that we gained. Another thing I forgot to mention was when I first got here, there was a multicultural student center, and it was located behind the Bryan Center information desk. It's not there now, but there was an information desk as you entered the Bryan Center, and the Student Multicultural Center was behind that, and it was made up of small cubicles of space for each of the cultural groups. And then they had a working space where if you walked in, there was all these banners, things that, from their demonstration and protests. But they operated out of that space behind, so they weren't visible at all. They were behind the Bryan Center information desk. But they did a lot from that space. Spectrum had a Spectrum House where they were able to do programming. Yeah, so that was, as we talk, all these things come back. Yeah. But Spectrum House Spectrum would do faculty events at Spectrum House, and that was a nice space that they had in the main quad. So, I always felt that I had the best students to work with on the campus. Had the most progressive students of color, the most progressive white students, and together we did a lot. So that for me was a very big point of pride.
I mean, you all laid a tremendous amount of foundation. I mean, even Linda being our director now, having seen us through all of that and been in partnership with you during that time. And my hope is that people have the opportunity to learn that history and see it. And so when they experience their spaces, or the good, the bad, the ugly, they can reflect from a space of intention and care and
absolutely
understanding.
Yeah, and I was happy to see Linda sort of, come along. Said when we first started, I don't think she was a program coordinator at that time. I think she might have been clerical, I don't know, I can't recall. But in coming to the Multicultural Center, we were able to bring her along to eventually become an assistant director. And from there, she's taken off, which is great. So yeah, so we grew together. I tried to do everything I could to try to nurture her along in terms of the things that we were doing. Because she had been here for a number of years before I came. So she had a lot of knowledge of the campus that was very helpful, and had worked with Bill Turner and with Dean Lattimore. So that was also very helpful. Yeah, no, it's great to see her where she is today.
So as we close, do you have any words of wisdom, call to action that I didn't directly ask you about, but that you would like to leave with us as we look forward to another 50 years?
Yeah, I think your main, and I think you understand this, so your main challenge is your space and how that's going to work out. I noticed on the website, the university website, or the student affairs website, I guess, there's thought of a freestanding multicultural center. I think that's what I read, or a freestanding center. But that's probably years in the making. So right now you have to think about how you're going to work with the space that you have and the challenges it presents to you, and that. And to be quite honest with you, I'm really curious why the Career Center is located in the student union. It seemed to me it would be better placed over where counseling services are held, the counseling center. But I mean, if I were here, that would have been the argument I would have put forward. But it's happened, and so now you have to sort of work with what you have. Bryant Center is a hard place to. It's a weird building. The way it's cut up, and the way the staircase just sort of is right in the central part of it. It's a challenge. I think it's kind of hard when you're separated from your students. That's a bit of a challenge, because how often do you intersect with them, unless you go to their space?
Got a lot of steps. I get a lot of steps in.
Yeah, you have to. And it would be much better if you were co-located, so that you could, and there'd be cross-fertilization across groups. I always imagine sort of like a quad or a pod kind of situation that would house all the different groups and then the administration as well. So you'd all be working together and interfaced. But I don't know, it's hard to, having not been around for so long, to give you really, any good advice. But just in the top of my head, that's the way I'm sort of seeing things.
Well, it reminds me our theme. It was something that Linda was naming as we were moving, and folks were very inquisitive about the move, and we would always name we were there and now we're here. And it's also something of a spiritual metaphor of how do we redefine what both our physical center looks like, but redefining your center as you experience change. I mean, we're fresh off of a pandemic, we're really in the post-isolation phase, and how do our communities persist? No matter whether you're staff, student, faculty, as folks who hold these identities, how do we move forward despite external, conditions, influences, etc. But
no, you have to, and you have to be strategic about it, and you have to be organized. It's important to, I think it would be important to have forums like the Unity Diversity Forum periodically, because you want to hear, and those forums were structured so that The president was invited. The deans were invited. So upper level administration was there.
It's a stage.
Yeah, I mean, so all the academic deans, the vice president of the university, the president of the university, provost, they all participated. I mean, they all were in attendance. So students, it gave students a forum where they could really present their concerns, their issues, what's working, what's not working. And I would encourage the center to do that and to document it. You don't have to do it every year, do it periodically, but maybe, you know, because students, I mean, they're here for 4 years and they move on and don't often pass information along. Hopefully the students are grooming other students to come along and take over the banner. But
Well, I want to thank you so much for our
absolutely,
time.
it's my pleasure.
I greatly appreciate it, and we're very happy to have you as a part of our history.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's part. I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk about these things. I haven't thought about them in a long time, and to be given the opportunity, I just sit and think for a while, because like I said, it hadn't been in front of my or top of mind for a long time, but it gave me the opportunity to really understand how much was accomplished during my tenure.
It's a tremendous amount. And I think it's important for people to see, even if it's in hindsight, the work that is done for these communities to feel affirmed in that way. I really think is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's given me the opportunity to appreciate what I didn't really, I don't think I really appreciated. I haven't really thought, but looked back and appreciated what had been accomplished during my tenure and how we did it. So this is a nice opportunity to sort of revisit that, and to feel good about it.
It is a privilege that this is the space that you could do that, and we're looking forward to having you at the event.
So I'm looking forward to the 50 year anniversary. That should be fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.